what an occasion this is. We're gathering in this, the 31st year, to celebrate excellence in the practice of architecture. This year, we are pleased to appreciate the architecture of Jon Jacobson of Metropolis Design. Thank you to the University for the invitation to deliver this prestigious lecture, and to Professor Noble for his very kind words. My practice of architecture over the last 30 years has been private and personal, not grand, heroic, or public. Rather than being defined with clearly delineated ideological positions, it has been philosophically tangled, introspective, and full of doubt. And this has unsurprisingly played out mostly in the most personal of architectures, the house. Primarily, my aims have been to search out an architecture which is deeply human, which emerges from its specific place, and which is true to our contemporary culture of architecture as a discipline and as an artistic pursuit. Although the work is primarily of one type, it is possible that the principles behind it may be of relevance to South African architects in other areas of practice. This is the house that I grew up in. It was designed and built by my father, an inventive metallurgical engineer. It was light, space, and optimism all mixed together. We were an observant Orthodox Jewish family with an unusual emphasis on art, literature, philosophy, music, and culture. I was very religious, and I remained so until my late 20s. As a result, although my choice of productive space has been an artistic one, spiritual space has in many ways been the primary space of my consciousness. It is now no longer the edifice of ritual and belief that offered answers and security. Rather, it has become an engagement with the extended space of tremendous mystery, with the unknowable universe that we all live inside. This, for me, is a space of searching, of persistent inquiry, of feeling the void of doubt at the core of being human. It is an uncertain and indefinite space, which paradoxically carries within it possibilities, infinite possibility for discovery and growth. This is what I call it. It is from this space that I believe much of my architecture is produced, and it is from this space that I address you tonight. Besides being a retrospective, this lecture is also an introspective. My aim is to share some of the inner processes and personal ideas that underlie both my body of work and my mode of practice. I will talk about the role that idea plays in our work, the design processes that we use, and then the relationship between our architecture and its context, the landscape of the Cape. Each time I will use a few projects as an example. What do I want the architecture to say? Every project starts with a detailed investigation of its underlying strata of meaning. What social theory will be engaged with? How progressive is it? What attitude will be taken to environment, to the theory of family? What other personal concerns will be woven in? It is important to engage critically with this information, to build the philosophical base for each project, and to consciously ensure that form follows idea with the same intensity that it follows function, and also that it doesn't just blindly follow other form. In any of our works, some of the content is drawn from the client's personal and social aspirations, and some from contemporary architectural culture. But the most potent component is the hidden set of ideas that emerge from our own engagements with the living world: cosmology, popular science, geology, art, music, literature, philosophy, theology, mysticism, and many, many others. And this emerges in the meaning resonances of the work, in its architectural content. You have a few individuals, some social aspirations, and a site. This is how I categorize the content that informs the architecture of the house. Content pertaining to the individual, their philosophies, values, and beliefs. Content derived from culture, architecture, the arts, fashion, religion, economics, politics, and content referring to the natural world and its processes. The I, the here, and the now of architecture. I try to ensure that content from each of these spheres is present in any particular work. It is not enough to just refer to other architectural form, to fashion, or to other cultural forms. Some content needs to come in from the broader world of ideas, to make a building feel alive, responsive, and connected to something larger than just urbanity and domesticity. The major implication of taking a content-based approach to design is that it requires a design framework that is largely operative at the level of idea rather than at the level of form. The design framework that I use is therefore based on a distinction between three realms of design operation. The purely ideal, which is entirely abstract, intentions, philosophy, belief, theory, the thought context of architecture. Then the realizational, which is entirely practical and includes structural and architectural techniques and constructional knowledge. And finally, the conceptual, which integrates the ideal and the realizational into built form that contains meanings. Really, the realm of creating architecture rather than just buildings. What exactly, though, is an architectural concept? I've discovered that it is different for every architect that I have met. For me, it is the bridge between idea and form. Neither purely abstract, nor purely material. It can be poetic image, comprised of metaphor, symbol, or analogy, or it can be a dream image, or a vague complex of images. Anything that can fluidly carry meanings through the forms of this world. And a conceptual design process is profoundly integrative, fusing together many intentions, many meanings into an indivisible whole. This whole design method allows some kind of conscious control over the relationship between the ideas, the forms, and the poetics of the project. At any point in the building process, it is possible to trace back and to critically assess whether any particular form is aligning with the core ideas of the project. In the early years of practice, design started with a diagram, with resolving pragmatic concerns like orientation, circulation, and program, and then proceeded to the plan. The final step was to intuitively overlay the plan with compelling architectural gestures. Here is an example of a very functional plan, a lovely floating roof, but no real central unifying concept.
The first works that are considered to be conceptual wholes were furniture pieces. These dog-like forms from the mid-90s integrated functional requirements with tectonic and sculptural concerns. The first building where I think this was achieved was this small building linked to the main house at Bo Constantia, in a way not unlike a large piece of furniture. It is a pavilion on a narrow shelf on the mountainside for meditation and relaxation. The intention was for an immersive experience of landscape and for the building to harmonize with and entirely disappear into its surroundings. The concept was a treehouse type sculpture, nestled in between the trees. It developed into two interlocking forms in a cruciform type of arrangement, one anchoring along the contours and the other thrusting out into space. The crossing of these two forms creates a complex range of spatial conditions, each with its own subtly unique character. And the tension between them creates an ambiguity, a certain strangeness, a constantly shifting perceptual field. So much, really, out of this very simple gesture. Minimum of means, and that was more than just the sum of its parts. I was studying cosmology and astronomy at the time. The world and our endless preoccupations within it was feeling tiny and insignificant. I think that this was the first taste of grappling with the notion of the infinite in architecture. This feeling of open-endedness, of multiple meanings and a lack of closure that is true both of the world that we inhabit and of the inner universe of consciousness within us. How can an understanding of concept as a dream image contain the meanings of the project and assist in expressing them in both the overall design conception and in every detail of the building? 5 years after Bo Constantia, another pleasure pavilion arrived, which originated in the Owners' Association of Water with Relaxation. The idea framework that we developed connected relaxation with an authentic experience of nature and with all manners of experience connected to water. The concept was simply this: a cloud over a lake raining. This image held the feelings and the emotionality of the design, watery, floaty, dreamlike. It stayed with me from the beginning right to the end, guiding the translation process at all scales of consideration. This is how the concept developed from its dream image into a little haiku, into an abstract architectural composition of forms hovering over water. Haiku are brief and precise. A lot of care went into articulating the interlocking forms, into the eloquent proportioning of elements, into the selection of materials, and into the precise detailing of the junctions. Other intentions inherent in concept, like the blurred distinction between inside and outside, are achieved through the seamless continuity of finishes and forms. The lifestyle content of the building is expressed through a varied relationship to the water, hovering over, submerged under, floating on, just looking over. And this is achieved through manipulation of the section. We generally put a lot of effort into unfolding the concept into the elements of the building at a detailed level, integrating structure, function, tectonics, and the thematic material, like for instance in these cloud-like screens. My favorite element is the stem, which mimics flowing water, sort of like this, simply by notching out alternative risers. And this is what is meant by form following meaning as much as it follows function. It follows that a preoccupation with underlying meanings will naturally place the human and the individual at the center of every architectural project. The belief systems, the psychosocial needs, family dynamics, physical habits, and spatial practices of our clients are necessary to investigate in detail in order to facilitate a meaningful spatial experience. We see our role as designers to saturate the environment with the meanings that enhance our clients' daily experience in every possible way, from the ergonomic and the practical to the ethereal and the spiritual. In the process, the logics, canons, and traditions of architecture and the ego of the architect need to sometimes make way for the non-rationalities of human need and aspiration. This small family house that you have been viewing epitomizes our very particular individual needs, bordering even on the idiosyncratic, can be sculpted and shaped and realized into architecture. This requires very close collaboration with our clients. The end result is rich and layered, and could not have been achieved had I designed the house entirely from my own architectural sensibility. Working in a human-centered way by collaborating with our clients has naturally led us to depart from the traditional top-down model of architectural practice. While as architects we have the formal spatial expertise, our clients operate from what one could call their informal spatial knowledge, or their understanding of house, body, and movement that they have developed as part of their life skills. While we as architects can rationally predict the spatial outcome, they are naturally spontaneous, ad hoc, and needs-based, and they need to experience space in order to understand it. As we all know, these differences can cause a lot of misunderstanding for us as a profession. Perhaps due to my early musical training, I have found that this tension has striking correspondences to the relationship between improvisatory and compositional behaviors in the making of music. Improvisation is the simultaneous creation and performance of music. Something like the way our clients relate to the making of space, through immediate action. In composition, however, music is created, structured, and rationalized in an entirely separate process to its performance. Something like the way architects behave towards space. To continue the analogy, we have had to become more improvisational in our architectural design behaviors in order to collaborate effectively with our clients. The way the modern movement has merged design and architecture into one mindset obscures a very useful fact that on a design level, which is primarily functional, our clients are more our equals than on an architectural level, which is to do with space, form, and meaning. And this intuitive, informal design understanding is the point of commonality where a collaboration can be built from. been the basis for our evolution of a client-centered approach to house design, a term that is paraphrased from the American psychologist Carl Rogers. In this approach, the processes of design and communication are tailored as much around the client's perspective as possible, rather than around the efficiencies of architectural and constructional practice. A lot of time is spent understanding our client's detailed needs. There's a lot of jamming and brainstorming, and the mode of presentation is non-technical, pictorial, and experience-based. The design is built up over time, from the bottom up, and it follows the pace that is set by the client's developing spatial understanding. These clients wanted their ideal house, and they were involved in every one of the thousands of decisions related to the functioning of the house on a lifestyle level. I didn't interfere. I advised them on technical aspects of design realization, but my main contribution was the architecture, with the embedded meanings and in maintaining the coherence of the concept in the face of constant, ongoing design development. The concept started out as a response to the site, a clearing surrounded by trees. It is light, permeable, and carefully scaled down into a number of discrete masses and planar elements. The house is organized around activated courtyards, it has a natural materiality, and it tries to form a sympathy with its site. This is the architecture. What about the design? The organization and circulation were designed in partnership with the client. Every detail, the stair, the fireplaces, the kitchens, the bathrooms, were intensively interrogated and evolved with the clients. Ultimately, every single one of the thousands of elements of this house reflects the client's complex spatial understanding. And this, I think, is how comfort should be defined. Johanni Palasma speaks of the difference between a house and a home. A house is the formal architectural product that contains ideas, philosophies, and values. It is as eternal as the ideas that it's built upon. A home contains lived lives, contradictory impulses, esoteric inner meanings. It absorbs memory, and it embodies the passing of time. How then does one manage to hold the conceptual space of the shape of the project in such a collaborative process, where the client is effectively a co-creator? How is undiluted architecture still achieved? As part of my master's at this university, I discovered that the answer to this lay in my design process. So, I studied the conceptual design development of the current project by analyzing the drawing trail in my design notebooks. The concept for this house draws both on the rockiness of its adjacent mountainside and on the permeability of its surrounding tree plantations. These are some of the discoveries about design process from the masters. Firstly, multiple concepts are utilized for different operational areas of the house, like planning, siting, massing, etc., and are then layered into a sort of concept complex. A few conceptual options, sometimes contradictory, are often considered simultaneously and are pursued in parallel right until the last minute. the design process is uncertain. It doesn't grab at the first idea that comes to mind. It carries on and on, looking to accumulate more and more. Finally, I have a number of criteria that I use to select a suitable concept for a project. Some of these are that a concept should be universal, easy for the client to understand, and therefore to value, and not change. It should not be entirely dependent on any one element, in case it gets cut. It should be capable of translation along multiple tectonic paths, in case there's a problem with the budget. This construction of concept is fluid and flexible. It allows the poetics to hang like a cloud over the project, raining on it occasionally as it changes and evolves. While architects generally evaluate the qualities of a concept on more lofty criteria, I would like to suggest an additional criteria, and that is simply this: the ability for concept to survive intact to the end of a building process while still satisfying all the client's detailed needs and requirements. I have coined a phrase for this principle: concept resilience. It ascribes to concept the same qualities of adaptiveness, durability, and flexibility that we require of a building within a set of changing environmental conditions. It is enabled by a design process which is highly structured on an ideal level and very fluid on an image level. This allows concept to be built up responsibly and for meanings to be accreted over time, rather than for one set of fixed ideas to be imposed from the top down at the inception of the project. This suits our view of design as an uncertain, not entirely scientific process, which for me is a little like a swim in a sea of ever-widening concerns, always in the process of becoming. What is the medium in which concept is grown, nurtured, and developed? In my case, it is drawing. When I started studying architecture after 3 years of medicine, I couldn't even draw a stick man. As a result, it is more of an investigative tool than an artistic tool. In a typical sketch design process, a long, uncertain, and convoluted stream of drawings explore, search out, and eventually integrate ideas into a concept. Somewhat independently of a particular project, I draw to investigate the underlying structure of things, in this case landscape, in order to understand its language, its rhythms, and its characteristics. Drawing is also a way of gaining an intimacy with subject matter that one wishes to understand better and that one wishes to grasp and use poetically. As discussed earlier, we are very concerned with the bridge between idea and form, with concept. A crucial function of drawing for me is to bring out new conceptual material from the subconscious, from where it has been brewing and brewing. This has developed into an improvisational type of drawing technique over the years, which I now call archi-comics. Develop thematic material and sometimes design concept using a sequence of framed drawings. The drawings are drawn in the moment, fast, without any premeditation, but obviously with some creative experience. A little bit like a jazz improvisation. This form is not a sequential narrative form like a comic, although it originates, of course, from a love of comics. Nevertheless, the sequential framing device allows me to progress in an intuitive way, but with a certain amount of intentionality and thematic continuity from idea to idea, basing the new drawing on what I have already drawn. This is also a little bit like the way a jazz musician builds up a solo, basing the coming phrase on the phrase that they've just played. The goal-oriented, considered, project-specific mindset of the architect is suspended. And that is in order to explore broader, freer fields of possibility. It takes many drawings, many repetitions, many dead ends. I just have got one rule. Don't stop drawing. Keep on playing. The process is also directly useful in conceptual design development. In this case, a lava lamp in the guest bedroom at Jonathan Noble's house was the catalyst for an improvisatory series that culminated in the concept for a specific project. Lava flowing sideways, the sideways movement of trees in the wind. Floating architectural elements with implied sideways movement. Only in the subconscious can these different images merge together. Here are two panels from a recent series called Infinities, exploring ambiguity in the interpretation of spatial constructions and of landscape through the use of distorted perspectives. These explorations are ways of thinking about some of the more intangible qualities of space, and will turn up in our architecture, I am sure, one of these days. So, having spoken about the meanings, the conceptual framework, and the design processes that enable our architecture, we will now, for the rest of this talk, address our contextual approach to landscape and the profound effect that it's had on shaping the character of our architecture. This is the landscape that is the backdrop to many of our projects. Weathered sandstone rock formations, granite boulders, forested valleys, rugged cliffs, the endless flat horizon of the sea. The sheer power of the landscape and its bleakness make all human efforts seem small and puny. The South African poet Sophia Gray, in his essay, A Version of Melancholy, speaks of the entire futile effort of importing continental culture into the hugeness, the dryness, barrenness, and sheer indifference of our landscape to its human occupants. Our stylish attempts at imported architecture often also look out of place, especially when not buffered by other buildings, like in a city, or by trees. How then does one integrate an ideal work of architecture into this particular Cape landscape? A Villa Savoy that expresses a wealth of cultural ideas, but is still in harmony with its place, melting in, being a part of the hugeness. And this problem bothered me for ages. Our largest and most public project at the time. I spent hours sitting on a rock on the site, looking and looking. How could the irregularity of the landscape somehow be imbibed by the building in a disciplined way? At some point, I got this feeling of the way the surrounding trees have got a defined shape, but contain irregular voids and shadows within themselves. And also a sense of the asymmetry of the rocky outcrops on the adjacent mountainscape. And so, the building was conceived as an irregular arrangement of pure cubic masses arranged around a set of axes. But these cubes were not really solid. They were suggestions of form, with all the elements of enclosure and shelter reduced to planes and floating disconnected within them. Large voids were introduced, enclosing shadows. This concept I called sheltering sky, to encapsulate the feeling of being contained while floating in tension in a state of becoming on the edge of vastness. And the vastness, the infiniteness of this landscape passes through this house like the wind. There is no definite sense of enclosure. Everything continues. There are strange gaps. There is ambiguity. But there is also form, and the form is pure. The spatial planning concept for the house was called Heart of the Home. It places the double volume kitchen, dining, family area in the center not only of home, but of landscape, with courtyards that radiate out in all directions. The transparency creates an immersiveness which is very intense and very real. At the same time, the house enables a lifestyle which is urbane, sophisticated, and highly social. The extroversion of its public areas is matched by the privacy and seclusion of its bedroom section, which hovers quietly overhead. The philosopher Carsten Harries notes that the natural world has been considered aesthetically inferior to the ideal world since the time of Hegel. In this view, geometry, proportion, mathematics have uncovered the underlying orders of the world that are far more truthful and beautiful than the disorderly manifestations of nature as we experience it. This, in Carsten Harries' view, contributes to the degradation of the natural world that we are well aware of. Combining aspects of the ideal and aspects of the naturalistic, we were in some way trying to reconcile the beauty of the experienced world with the beauty of its underlying structure. This was a starting point. This composition is an artistic representation of natural order. It is not an intrinsically natural order in itself. It precipitated an ongoing investigation into the processes that form the cave sandstone formations that surround many of our projects, to in some way uncover deeper principles of place that could organically relate architecture and landscape. An ongoing search. Kengo Kuma, in his book Non-Object, talks of an architecture based on relationships rather than on objectness. What does this really mean? Can the architectural object dissolve until it is only evident as a set of relationships between its constituent elements and between these elements and their surroundings? What then is revealed by this dissolution? The harmonic approach to landscape at Bo Constantia continued to develop further 10 years later at another residence in the Constantia Valley, this time on a secluded site next to a river in a ring of trees. It is soft, leafy, gently sloping, an island in space. This is a site that could accommodate the pure immersivity of a Farnsworth house and allowed us to go one step further, to let go entirely of the notion of the architectural object and to focus only on an architecture of relationships. The concept was a floating tree canopy of a roof, levitating over a stepped ground plane with detached wall elements under it. The real walls are the trees that surround it. The form of the house was penetrated by many courtyards, bent around a tree, completely subordinated to its surroundings. The notion of an ideal form and of a geometric order was eroded and eroded until it disappeared. All that is left is a set of relationships with the outdoors and between detached architectural elements, the space between. And the space between relies on ambiguity for its power and its meaning. It is really the space that is left over for interpretation, for the viewer's imagination to complete the picture. What is this conversation between water, massive concrete, and hanging rock really about? They resonate with multiple meanings that don't lead to swift conclusions, but rather to a sustained state of trying to grasp the elusive. Italo Calvino, in Memos for the Next Millennium, writes, "The poet of vagueness can only be the poet of exactitude." In this project, this poetic vagueness, I think, is achieved through a particularly precise form of minimalism. The quality of each element has to be separated out and then crafted and tuned through careful selection of materials. The background must be simplified and refined to remove all perceptual interference. In this case, no light fittings, very careful composition. And the elements must be reconciled with structure and rationalized to still effectively incorporate domestic functionalities. On one level, it's a technically demanding rational design process. But to achieve the poetry, this isn't enough. You almost have to feel the details into being. A purely Messian emptiness, emptiness for its own sake, is not really sought after here. Rather, this is an emptiness that is created in order to be filled with something else, a focused awareness of the vitality of the natural surroundings. And the purpose of this is an unparalleled feeling of immersion in landscape. Can a similar open-ended set of relationships occur between a fully fledged architectural object and its surroundings? Revisiting Bo Constantia for a second house, 10 years after the first, on an exposed mountainside, completely unbuffered, blasted by all the elements, we wanted the obduracy of stone, the unyieldingness of rock. We imagined a large rock on the mountainside, its long flat form echoing that of the mountain peak above it. This conversation between man-made and real rock anchors it in its landscape. We call this a dialogic approach to landscape, where a relationship is established between an element of landscape and the manufactured object that poetically interprets it. In this case, a brooding concrete block slashed and cracked in places, but still in immaculate composed architectural form, places the brutalities of reason and the brutalities of nature in direct visual relationship with each other. Our powers of abstraction as humans are as, if not more powerful, than the natural forces on our planet. This is the real, in a sense, tragic tension expressed by this house, and what I think underlies the particular erratic resonance that it has with its surroundings. Aside from a physical and psychological protection from the elements, the intention was not to lose a sense of immersion and continuity with landscape. The rock is carved out to let in its surroundings, courtyards frame the sky and views of the mountains. Each courtyard has its own quality, its own set of relationships. The living enclosure is experienced as a series of blurred gradations of inside and outside space. What is inside and what is outside? The inside is washed with sunlight from above, with a light that is constantly changing. The massive concrete walls come alive in the light, luminous and otherworldly. We wanted a sense of the timeless, of stillness, of silence, of concentration, and of deep feeling. This house is therefore about mass, solidity, hugeness, about pure sculptural form, light, and shadow. Minimalism in this case is enlisted to create a sense of significance and resonance. Bold forms, finely honed, and beautifully textured. There are just two primary materials: concrete, timber, soft, hard, in a very complex conversation. There's a mixture of ambiguity and clarity in this house. Clarity of formal execution, ambiguity of intention. The ambiguity allows latitude for the experiential interpretation of the architecture. It introduces questions, uncertainties that ask to be engaged with. And the formal clarity? It helps to frame the questions in plain language so that the dialogue that began between building and landscape can continue between the building and its inhabitants. I haven't spoken much about culture and architecture. This project in Bishop's Court, an elite suburb with a very traditional identity, mainly freestanding villas in a variety of historic styles, illustrates another type of dialogic relationship with the landscape. This time, it is the poetic reinterpretation of a typological form, the pitched roof, to resonate with the language of its surroundings. This was an alteration to a very conventional, compartmented revivalist house with no relationship to ground on a very steep, oddly shaped site. It needed to be recast as an open, flowing, immersive space, strongly bound to its location. The entire top floor is interpreted as roof, with dormers that are elaborated to echo the powerful cliffs of the back of Table Mountain. The house becomes a sort of floating mountain itself, new additions outside of the existing envelope are expressed as separate timber-clad, buttress-like elements. The mountain metaphor is extended to the entrance procession, culminating in a massive abstracted rock overhang. The dormers also bring in light and views in unexpected ways into the interior. As an abstraction of typology and landscape, the composition relies on the clarity and precision of its junctions and on the purity of its forms for its eloquence. And what started out as an interpretative journey prior to this project has continued into new metaphoricities of roof, yet to find a home. In much of the work that we've already discussed, there is a concern with place. Firstly, for finding a place for an architecture within the landscape, and secondly, for making place within the architecture for an individual person and their needs. This small garden pavilion extends the preoccupation with place into a concern for the intensity of place. How placey can a place get? How saturated with the awareness of being in this place right now? I call this quality placefulness. At the far end of this garden, up on the urban edge of Constantia, was an incomplete folly with round pond and cascading water feature. The clients wanted it reimagined and incorporated into a garden pavilion so that they could enjoy an unmediated experience of the surrounding landscape. The pavilion was conceptualized as a nest in the trees, light and cozy. But then, as I absorbed the realities of the landscape, it became strong, powerful, and essential. A floating tree nest kind of combination that tries to essentialize the feeling of its surroundings, their hugeness, and their silence. The flat concrete roof was separated from its perimeter beam to form a continuous skylight which provides a varying play of light all day on the textured concrete walls. The passing of time. Timelessness. There are only two materials. As a result, the sense of concentration is very real. Our aim was not only to provide a place of pleasure and enjoyment, but a place in which to celebrate being. One aspect of placefulness is the emotion embodied in the architecture. In many of our houses, as in much of South African architecture, emotion is highly sublimated, domesticated, and by and large suppressed. Pretty much a classical approach. In this building, I think some of the classical restraint fell away, and some real emotion was allowed into the world. When the shuttering came off the beam structure, I walked over to see the result with my very sophisticated and worldly clients, Luca and Alessandra. We looked at the rawness, the refinement, and the moodiness of this small concrete creature at the end of the garden. Luca said, "John, this is a monster piece." In my former religious years, I was very preoccupied with integrating spirituality and art. Studying architecture as a religious person, the big question for me was, how can architecture facilitate day-to-day spiritual experience? Modern religious historians like Mircea Eliade have traced how religions have formally elaborated on the relationship with the divine within ceremonial and sacred architectures. Theologians like Rudolf Otto describe the sacred encounter, the encounter with the mysterium tremendum. But what about the everyday? And what about at home, in the house? What can be done in a simple manner that is experiential, not ideal, not geometric, and not symbolic, to somehow embody a living spirituality? Is it possible to achieve this? This impulse, I realize, has been slowly evolving in our work. It started with a desire for a union with nature, for the vitality of insight that emerges when immersed in landscape. The architecture of glass and courtyards is motivated in part by this impulse. It continued with the use of natural materials, stone, timber, and other materials like concrete that still contain some connection to the natural forces that formed them, to realness, to the mysteries of realness. And further, into exploring an architecture of relationships rather than an architecture of things, into what it is that lies in between us and others, us and the world. And it has also manifested in the search for vitality in architecture, for a sense of livingness in the built environment. The jazz theorist Ted Goyer talks of jazz as the imperfect art because, although it is undeniably art, it embodies the unfolding incompletenesses of the lived moment. And I think that this sense of incompleteness and becoming can be embodied in architecture in the incomplete application of design rationality and in allowing our clients' improvisational spatial behaviors to coexist with our ideal geometries and spatial conceptions. What of actual spiritual experience? The Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, in his book, The Secular Age, identifies two personalities, the modern Buffett personality and the traditional porous personality. The Buffett personality is one that rationally selects which experiences of the world to take in and which to exclude. That's us, based in mind, filtering everything, ruled by an absent God, who is transcendent. The porous personality is unmediated. There are no clear boundaries between what is inside and what is outside the psyche. Everything flows in. This has been associated with the traditional and the pre-modern, and the mindset that experiences a so-called enchanted world, a God that is immanent, saturating the rocks and the trees with being. As moderns, we have both of these personalities within us. Isolated moments of porosity within a very critically aware, rationally controlled existence. This tension between a knowing rationality and simply being in the world is our inheritance as moderns. Can we, as Paul Ricoeur asks, achieve a second naivete, simultaneously rationally detached and experientially embedded in authentic beingness? I don't know, but I believe that the best place to try this out is at home, the most personal of spaces. This is not about instant spirituality or about turning a home into a temple. It is more about making space for moments of connectedness, of authenticity, and of realness. These are some of the environmental qualities I am talking about. This brings us back to where we started, to the underlying ideas that inform our architectures. If we base our architecture on a closed set of ideas that has been carefully rationalized, that excludes anomaly, that presents a particular ideological view, we get an architecture of answers. Corporate architecture is an example. So are architectural styles, carefully manicured and censored to present one particular point of view. On the other hand, if we allow contradiction to remain in our idea set, for tension to build, for the anomalous and the strange to remain, we can attain an architecture which embodies questions, which presents life as a mystery, as a complex act of navigating uncertainty, rather than as something that can be entirely solved through acts of design. Zen Buddhism has its koans, the sound of one hand clapping. Is the impossible question, the encounter with what we don't understand, not a fitting subject for architecture? The best questions, after all, have got no answers. And like architecture, they are permanent. They are here with us forever. This is the kind of spirituality that architecture can espouse. An encounter with mystery as a thing in itself, as the living heart of our world. I would not say that the theme of a contemporary spirituality is fully developed in our work, but this is the direction I'm moving towards. And this forms the area of study in my coming PhD at this university. Before I conclude, some thanks. Thank you to Sophia Jacobson for the exhibition design and the video material, to Cornelis van der Nest, who has spent the entire year realizing the exhibition. Thanks for all the hard work and the beautiful models. To Jean-Marie Steyn for her large contribution to the exhibition, and to the entire staff body at Metropolis, past and present, for their parts in the creative journey of the last 30 years. A special thanks to Jana van Dalen for proposing, curating and producing a book of my drawings, especially for this event. Thank you to my partner Frankie for her love and her support. Ivan Cady, Lindsay Bremner, Joan Oero and Doron Rosmarin, all of who contributed massively to my development as an architect. And finally, to Professor Jonathan Noble for his support and guidance in the last 2 years. To conclude, underneath all the forms that we create as architects are ideas and values, which are really what invest architecture with meaning, depth, and resonance. It may have become clear during the course of this lecture that despite the seeming clarity of our architecture, the design process and the mindset steering the process is anything but certain. It is filled with doubt, unwilling to fix on a quick answer, and it welcomes contradiction, tension, and thickness of intentionality. And this is ultimately because at the center of our efforts as architects are humans, not buildings. Humans inside and outside of societies require stable environments, enclosure, security, order, and constancy. Yet, I believe, we can provide all of this without excluding the uncertain and the indefinite, without excluding wonder, connectedness, and engagement with what we don't know, with what really is an essential quality of reality. Thank you.